Some people drift through life unnoticed, believing their story has already been written. Walter Thorne was one of them, a 64-year-old school custodian whose world had shrunk to empty hallways and the echo of his own footsteps. His wife was gone, his children lived far away, and most days he felt like a ghost in his own life. Then a 6-year-old girl named Lucy handed him a birthday invitation that changed everything. She didn't want him at her party for the cake or games. She wanted him there because her sick mother might smile if someone showed up who cared. Walter went to that party, not knowing it would become the beginning of the most important friendship of his life. But when a child's mother is dying, how much hope can one lonely man really offer? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning alarm at 5:30 had been the same for 17 years. Walter Thorne's calloused hand reached across the empty expanse of his queen-sized bed, muscle memory still searching for Martha's warm shoulder before reality settled in like frost on windows. She'd been gone 3 years now, but his body hadn't learned to forget. He sat on the edge of the bed, bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor, and looked at the photograph on Martha's nightstand. Her laugh lines crinkled around eyes the color of autumn leaves, the same eyes that had looked at him with such fierce love for 38 years of marriage. The wedding ring on his finger caught the dim light, a simple gold band that had grown loose with age and grief, but never came off. "Morning, sweetheart," he whispered to the photograph, same as every morning. Another day at the salt mines. The house felt too big around him as he moved through his routine. Coffee black, 2 pieces of toast with strawberry jam, Martha's homemade preserves he couldn't bring himself to finish. The kitchen still held her presence, the ceramic rooster, collection on the windowsill, the recipe cards in her careful handwriting tucked behind the coffee maker, the small dent in the linoleum where she'd dropped a cast-iron skillet while dancing to the radio. By 6:15, Walter was backing his 15-year-old Ford pickup out of the driveway, the engine coughing to life in the crisp morning air. Maplewood was the kind of small town where everyone knew your business, where Main Street still had a barbershop with a spinning pole and a diner that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Walter preferred it that way. Predictable, quiet, safe from surprises that might crack the careful shell he'd built around his heart. Maplewood Elementary School sat at the end of Elm Street like a red brick guardian, its tall windows reflecting the morning sun. Walter had been the head custodian there for 17 years, ever since he'd taken early retirement from the county maintenance department. The job suited him, solitary, methodical, essential but invisible. He knew every squeak in the floors, every temperamental light switch, every hiding place where children left forgotten lunchboxes. His keys jangled against his hip as he unlocked the main entrance, the familiar smell of floor wax and childhood dreams washing over him. The hallways stretched before him like empty promises, waiting to be filled with the chaos and laughter of 300 students. But for now, in these quiet morning hours, the school belonged to Walter. He started his rounds in the kindergarten wing, where construction paper artwork decorated bulletin boards like small windows into pure imagination. Mrs. Patterson's room smelled of crayons and apple juice, the alphabet marching across the wall above miniature desks arranged in perfect rows. Walter emptied the wastebaskets, swept the floors with practiced efficiency, and straightened the reading corner where picture books waited patiently for small hands. The first-grade hallway was where he encountered them every morning. The drawings that children left behind, forgotten masterpieces of stick figures and rainbow houses. He'd learned not to throw them away too quickly. Sometimes a child would come looking for their creation, eyes wide with the panic of loss. Walter kept a special box in his supply closet for such rescues. It was in Mrs. Henderson's first-grade classroom that Walter first noticed her. Lucy Martinez sat in the front row, her dark hair pulled back in neat braids, tied with yellow ribbons. She was smaller than the other 6-year-olds, delicate as a sparrow, but her eyes held an alertness that seemed older than her years. While other children chatted and fidgeted, Lucy watched everything with quiet intensity. Mrs. Henderson was the kind of teacher who made Walter remember why he'd stayed at the school so long. She spoke to him like he mattered, asked about his weekend, remembered that he preferred his coffee without cream. Most of the staff treated him with polite indifference, not unkind, just unaware. But Janet Henderson saw him as more than moving furniture and emptying trash cans. "Morning, Walter," she'd say, looking up from her lesson plans with a genuine smile. "How are you holding up?" It was a loaded question in a small town where everyone knew about Martha's cancer, about the long months of treatments that ultimately failed, about the man who'd been left behind to figure out how to live alone. Walter appreciated that she asked without expecting him to bare his soul in response. "Can't complain," he'd answer, which was his standard reply to most inquiries about his well-being. He could complain, actually. He could talk about the nights when sleep refused to come, about eating dinner in front of the television because the dining room table felt too big for one person, about how he'd started talking to Martha's photograph like she might answer back. But those were private griefs, not meant for sharing in fluorescent-lit classrooms. The children began arriving around 7:45, a gradual crescendo of voices and footsteps that transformed the building from Walter's quiet domain into something alive and unpredictable. He watched from the supply closet doorway as parents dropped off their treasures, some children racing toward their classrooms with unbounded enthusiasm, others clinging to adult hands with the universal reluctance of Monday morning. Lucy arrived with her mother every day at exactly 8 o'clock. Emma Martinez was a young woman, maybe 32 or 33, with the same dark hair as her daughter but pulled back in a simple ponytail. She worked as a waitress at Murphy's Diner downtown, Walter had heard, supporting herself and Lucy without much help from family. There was something fragile about Emma, a thinness that spoke of too much worry and too little rest. Walter noticed things about people. It came with being invisible. He saw how Emma's hand lingered on Lucy's shoulder before letting her go, how she watched through the classroom window until her daughter was safely settled at her desk. He saw the love there, fierce and protective, but also something else. Fear, maybe. The kind of fear that came from knowing how quickly everything you loved could disappear. The morning routine continued with mechanical precision. Walter moved through the building like a ghost with purpose, mopping spills, fixing broken desk legs, replacing burned-out bulbs in ceiling fixtures that had seen better decades. The teachers nodded their acknowledgement, the principal offered her distracted thanks, and the children looked right through him as if he were part of the furniture. It wasn't that Walter minded being invisible. After Martha died, visibility had felt like exposure, like standing naked in a spotlight while everyone counted your losses. Being overlooked meant being safe from well-meaning sympathy and awkward silences. It meant he could grieve at his own pace without performing recovery for an audience. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between tasks, Walter felt the weight of his isolation pressing down like thick wool. His children called dutifully, Sarah from Seattle every Sunday evening, Michael from Denver on alternating Wednesdays. But their conversations felt scripted, polite exchanges of surface information that never touched the deeper currents of loneliness. Sarah had her own family now, twin boys who barely knew their grandfather, a husband who worked in technology and spoke in acronyms Walter didn't understand. She worried about him. He could hear it in her voice. But she lived 2,000 miles away and had her own life to manage. Michael was unmarried, focused on his career in architecture, kind but distracted by the demands of building someone else's dreams. They were good children who'd grown into good adults, but they were strangers to him now in the way that often happened when geography and time created distance. They remembered the father who'd taught them to ride bicycles and helped with homework, but they didn't know the man who talked to photographs and counted the days until retirement with equal parts anticipation and dread. The lunch period brought its own rhythm to the school day. Walter ate his sandwich, always turkey and Swiss on white bread, Martha's preferred combination, in the boiler room where the mechanical hum provided a soundtrack for solitude. Through the small window, he could see the playground where children ran and shouted with the pure joy of being 6 and 7 and 8 years old. Lucy often sat alone during recess, not from rejection, but by choice. She preferred books to jump rope, quiet observation to loud games. Walter found himself watching for her, making sure she seemed content in her solitude rather than lonely. There was a difference, he'd learned. Solitude was a choice. Loneliness was a sentence. The afternoon brought its own challenges: spilled paint in the art room, a clogged toilet in the second-grade bathroom, a broken window latch that required more patience than skill to repair. Walter approached each task with the methodical care of someone who understood that small problems left unattended became big problems that affected everyone. As 3:15 approached, the energy in the building shifted toward dismissal. Children packed backpacks with the enthusiasm of prisoners planning escape. Teachers gathered their belongings with the weary satisfaction of another day survived, and Walter began the process of returning the school to its overnight stillness. He was replacing a fluorescent tube in the main hallway when Lucy appeared beside him. So quietly he didn't notice her at first. She stood patiently while he worked, her small hands clasped behind her back, waiting for him to acknowledge her presence. "Hello there," Walter said, climbing down from the stepladder with the careful movements of a man who'd learned not to trust his knees completely. "Shouldn't you be heading home?" Lucy looked up at him with those serious, dark eyes, and Walter felt something shift in his chest. It had been so long since a child had looked at him directly, had seen him as more than part of the scenery. "My Mum's running a little late," Lucy said, in a voice that was clear and precise for someone so young. "Mrs. Henderson said I could wait here until she comes." Walter nodded, understanding the careful arrangements that single parents had to make, the delicate balance of work schedules and childcare that could collapse with one unexpected delay. He'd seen Emma rushing through the school doors on more than one occasion, apologetic and breathless from whatever crisis had detained her. "That's fine," Walter said, folding up the stepladder. "Would you like to help me check the classrooms, make sure everything's ready for tomorrow?" Lucy's face brightened with the simple pleasure of being useful, of being included in important adult business. She followed Walter from room to room, her small sneakers squeaking against the polished floors, as he turned off lights and straightened chairs with the precision of long practice. In Mrs. Henderson's classroom, Lucy stopped at the bulletin board, where student artwork was displayed. Her own drawing was there, a crayon family of stick figures standing in front of a house with smoke curling from the chimney. 2 figures, one tall and one small, holding hands under a yellow sun that dominated the page. "That's me and my mum," Lucy said, pointing to the drawing with obvious pride. "We live in an apartment, but I drew a house because maybe someday we'll have one." Walter studied the drawing, noting the careful attention to detail: curtains in the windows, flowers in the garden, a small dog running in the yard. It was the kind of picture that spoke of hopes rather than reality, of dreams that children carried like secrets. "It's beautiful," Walter said, and meant it. "Your mum must be very proud." Lucy's smile faltered slightly, and Walter caught a glimpse of something more complex than childhood optimism. "She gets tired a lot," Lucy said quietly. "She works really hard at the diner, and sometimes she has to go to the doctor, but she always makes time to look at my drawings." Before Walter could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. Emma Martinez appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with the exertion of running and the anxiety of being late. She was thinner than Walter remembered, her clothes hanging loose in a way that suggested recent weight loss. "Lucy, baby, I'm so sorry," Emma said, crossing the room to gather her daughter into a fierce hug. "The lunch rush ran late, and then I had to—" She stopped, noticing Walter for the first time. "Oh, I hope she wasn't any trouble." "No trouble at all," Walter assured her, recognizing the particular exhaustion that came from carrying too much. responsibility alone. Lucy was helping me with my rounds. She's good company. Emma's smile was grateful but strained, and Walter noticed the way she leaned against the desk, as if standing required more effort than it should. Up close, he could see the shadows under her eyes, the pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. "Thank you," Emma said, and Walter heard layers of meaning in those simple words. Gratitude not just for watching Lucy, but for treating her daughter with kindness, for seeing her as worth protecting. As they gathered Lucy's backpack and jacket, Walter found himself wanting to say more, to offer some gesture of support that wouldn't overstep the careful boundaries that strangers maintained. But the words wouldn't come, and the moment passed as Emma and Lucy headed toward the exit. Walter finished his evening routine in thoughtful silence, the encounter with Lucy and Emma lingering in his mind like the aftertaste of something sweet. He locked the building and walked to his truck under a sky painted orange and pink by the setting sun, Martha's wedding ring catching the last light of day. The drive home took him past Murphy's diner, where he could see Emma through the window, already back at work despite her obvious fatigue. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, coffee pot in one hand, an order pad in the other. Her smile professional and tired. At home, Walter heated a can of soup and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out at the backyard, where Martha's rose bushes were preparing for winter dormancy. The house felt especially quiet tonight, filled with the echo of a child's laughter and the memory of serious, dark eyes that had looked at him like he mattered. Before bed, he paused at Martha's photograph, running his thumb along the silver frame that had grown smooth with handling. "Met a little girl today," he told the image softly. "Reminds me of Sarah when she was that age. Serious, but with so much hope in her eyes. Her mama's struggling, Martha. I can see it. Makes me think about all the times you worried about our kids, how you always found a way to make things work." The photograph held its silence, but Walter could almost hear Martha's voice, the way she'd always encouraged him to see the needs of others, to offer help without being asked. She'd been the heart of their marriage, the one who remembered birthdays and brought casseroles to grieving neighbors, who saw connections where Walter saw only separate lives. As he settled into bed, Walter found himself thinking about Lucy's drawing, the stick-figure family with their hopeful house and sunny sky. Tomorrow would bring another day of routine, another cycle of cleaning and maintaining and staying invisible. But something had shifted. Some small crack in the careful walls he'd built around his heart. Outside his window, the October wind rustled, through maple leaves that were just beginning to turn, and Walter fell asleep thinking about a 6-year-old girl who saw houses where others saw apartments, who dreamed in crayon colors despite the shadows gathering around her small world. The birthday invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by small hands that trembled with either excitement or nervousness. Walter couldn't tell which. He was replacing burnt-out bulbs in the main hallway when Lucy appeared beside him like a shadow gaining substance. "Mr. Walter." Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she held something behind her back with the careful secrecy of childhood surprises. Walter climbed down from his stepladder, his knees protesting the movement with their usual morning stiffness. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lucy brought her hands forward, revealing a handmade card decorated with crayon flowers and glitter that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. Her name was written across the front in careful block letters, surrounded by hearts that had been colored outside the lines with determined precision. "It's my birthday on Saturday," Lucy said, her dark eyes searching Walter's face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "I'm turning 7. Mom said I could invite one special person, and I want to invite you." Walter took the card with hands that suddenly felt too large and clumsy. The paper was warm from Lucy's grip, slightly wrinkled from being carried in a small backpack alongside homework and broken crayons. Inside, in the same careful lettering, Lucy had written, "Please come to my party. My mom says you're a kind man, and kind men make people smile." "Lucy, that's very sweet of you," Walter began, but she interrupted him with the urgency of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "It's not just for me," she said quickly, as if afraid he might refuse. Before hearing her complete request, "It's for my mom too. She's been really sad lately, and the doctor visits make her tired, and I thought maybe if you came to my party, she might smile like she used to." The words hit Walter with unexpected force. Here was a 6-year-old, 7 on Saturday, who had noticed her mother's sadness and thought a lonely custodian might somehow be the solution. The innocence of it, the pure faith that kindness could heal whatever was wrong in her small world, made Walter's throat tighten. "Where's your party going to be?" he asked, though he'd already decided to attend. How could he possibly disappoint this child who had seen something in him that he'd forgotten existed? "At our apartment," Lucy said, her confidence growing as she sensed his acceptance. "It's not very big, but Mom said we could have cake and play games. She's making chocolate cake from scratch because that's my favorite." Walter looked down at the invitation again, noting the careful way Lucy had drawn a tiny stick figure that might have been him, tall and thin with a mustache, standing next to 2 shorter figures under a rainbow. "I'd be honored to come to your party, Lucy." The smile that spread across her face was like sunrise after a long night, bright and full of promise. She clapped her hands together with the pure joy of getting exactly what she'd hoped for, and Walter felt something long dormant stir in his chest. "Really? You'll really come?" "I'll really come," Walter confirmed, and Lucy launched herself forward, wrapping her thin arms around his waist, in a hug that lasted exactly 3 seconds, before she seemed to remember that she was at school and he was the janitor and there were rules about such things. She stepped back, suddenly shy again, but her smile never dimmed. "Mom's going to be so happy. She always says you have kind eyes." Saturday arrived grey and drizzly, the kind of October day that hinted at the winter waiting in the wings. Walter spent the morning in unusual preparation, changing his shirt 3 times before settling on a blue button-down that Martha had always said brought out his eyes. He stopped at the grocery store and wandered the aisles like a man in unfamiliar territory, finally settling on a bouquet of daisies for Emma and a small wrapped book for Lucy, a collection of fairy tales with illustrations that reminded him of her artwork. The apartment complex was older but well-maintained, the kind of place where working families stretched their dollars as far as they could go. Walter found Lucy's apartment on the 2nd floor, the number 2B written on the door in fading gold letters. He could hear voices inside, the sound of children laughing and adults talking in the comfortable chaos of a birthday party. Emma answered his knock, and Walter was struck again by how fragile she looked. She wore a yellow sundress that had been carefully pressed, her hair pulled back with a clip that sparkled with the same optimism as Lucy's invitation, but her skin had a translucent quality that spoke of illness poorly hidden, and Walter noticed the way she gripped the doorframe, as if needing its support. "Walter, you came," Emma said, and her smile was genuine despite the obvious fatigue behind it. "Lucy was so worried you might change your mind." "I gave my word," Walter replied, offering her the flowers. "These are for you." Emma accepted the daisies with hands that trembled slightly, and Walter pretended not to notice. "They're beautiful, thank you. Please, come in." The apartment was small, but carefully decorated, every inch used with the efficiency of someone who understood the value of limited space. Balloons hung from the ceiling in bright primary colors, and a banner reading, "Happy 7th Birthday, Lucy," stretched across the living room wall. The chocolate cake sat on the kitchen counter like a work of art. 3 layers with careful frosting flowers and 7 pink candles waiting to be lit. Lucy appeared at Walter's elbow, wearing a pink dress with a full skirt that made her look even smaller than usual. "You came!" she announced to the room at large, as if his presence was the most important element of her celebration. The other guests were a modest group, 3 children from Lucy's class with their parents, and a woman Walter recognized as Emma's sister Carol from the occasional visits to school. Carol watched Walter with frank curiosity, clearly trying to figure out what the custodian was doing at her niece's birthday party. "Everyone, this is Mr. Walter from my school," Lucy said, pulling him further into the room with the confidence of a perfect hostess. "He's my special friend." The introductions were made with the awkward politeness of adults thrown together by children's social arrangements. Walter found himself seated on the small sofa between two mothers who made conversation about school fundraisers and upcoming Halloween costumes, while their children played musical chairs around the coffee table. It was during the game of Pin, the tail on the donkey, that Walter glimpsed the medical papers. Emma had stepped into the kitchen to light the birthday candles, and a folder on the counter fell open, revealing documents with letterhead from the regional medical center. Walter couldn't help but see the words that jumped from the page: terminal, palliative care, estimated timeline. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow. Emma wasn't just tired from working double shifts at the diner. She was dying, and Lucy's 7th birthday party was playing out against the backdrop of borrowed time. Walter forced himself to look away, to focus on Lucy's delighted laughter as she tried to pin the tail somewhere near the donkey's vicinity. But the words he'd seen burned behind his eyes, explaining so many things: Emma's thinness, her careful way of moving, the shadows that never quite left her face despite her smiles. When it came time for cake, Lucy insisted that Walter sit beside her, and he watched as she made her wish with the serious concentration of someone who understood that wishes were precious things. The 7 candles flickered in the dim apartment light, reflecting off the tears that Emma tried to hide as she sang happy birthday to her daughter. "What did you wish for?" one of the other children asked, after Lucy had blown out all the candles. In one breath, Lucy glanced at her mother, then at Walter, her expression more serious than any 7-year-old's should be. "I wished for my family to be happy," she said simply, as if happiness was something that could be ordered from a catalogue if you just knew where to look. The party continued with gift opening and more games, but Walter found himself watching Emma more closely, noting the way she sat carefully, how she let Carol do most of the heavy lifting while she supervised from the sidelines. When Lucy opened his book and threw her arms around him in another spontaneous hug, Walter felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. After the other guests had left, Walter lingered to help with cleanup. Despite Emma's protests, Lucy had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted from the excitement of her special day, and Emma covered her with a soft blanket with the tenderness of someone who treasured every ordinary moment. "She talks about you all the time," Emma said quietly as they washed dishes in the tiny kitchen. "Mr. Walter this, Mr. Walter that. You've been very kind to her." Walter dried a plate with careful attention to detail, buying himself time to find the right words. "She's a special little girl. You should be proud." "I am." Emma's voice was soft, but Walter heard the fierce love beneath it, the determination to make every remaining moment count. "I worry about her, though, about what will happen when—" She stopped herself, glancing toward the sleeping child. "The future has a way of working itself out," Walter said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. What he knew was that this child and her mother had somehow become important to him in the space of a single afternoon, and he wasn't ready to examine too closely what that might mean. As he prepared to leave, Lucy stirred on the sofa and opened sleepy eyes. "Mr. Walter, will you come visit us again?" Walter looked at Emma, who nodded with gratitude and something that might have been hope. "If your mom says it's okay, I'd like that very much." "It's okay," Lucy said, with the certainty of someone who had never doubted that good people would stay if asked nicely. "We're family now." The word hung in the air between them. Family, chosen rather than born, offered with the generous heart of a child who had seen loneliness and decided to do something about it. As Walter walked to his truck through the October drizzle, Lucy's birthday invitation crumpled in his pocket, and the taste of chocolate cake still sweet on his tongue. He realized that something fundamental had changed in the space between arriving and leaving. For the first time in 3 years, Walter Thorne was no longer invisible. Monday morning arrived with the weight of new knowledge. Walter went through his routine: alarm at 5:30, coffee black, 2 pieces of toast, but everything felt different now. The medical papers he'd glimpsed at Lucy's party haunted his thoughts, transforming what had seemed like fatigue and overwork into something far more serious and final. At school, he found himself looking for Lucy with an intensity that surprised him. She arrived at her usual time, 8 o'clock sharp. But Walter noticed things he'd missed before: the way Emma held her daughter's hand a moment longer than necessary, the careful way she moved as if conserving energy for more important battles. "Morning, Mr. Walter," Lucy called out as she passed his supply closet, her backpack bouncing with each step. She waved with the uninhibited joy of someone whose world still felt safe and predictable, and Walter waved back, struck by the innocence that terminal illness couldn't touch from the outside. Mrs. Henderson noticed the change in him almost immediately. "You seem different today," she observed, as Walter emptied the classroom wastebaskets with unusual care. "Good different, more present." Walter paused in his work, considering how to explain what couldn't easily be put into words. "Went to a birthday party over the weekend," he said finally. "Reminded me of some things I'd forgotten. Lucy Martinez's party." Mrs. Henderson's smile was knowing. "She was so excited about inviting you. That little girl has taken quite a shine." "To you, Walter." "The feeling's mutual," Walter admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "She's got something special, that one. Sees the world differently than most kids her age." "She's had to grow up faster than she should," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, and Walter heard the weight of knowledge in her voice. The kind that teachers carried about their students' home lives, the struggles they witnessed but couldn't always fix. As the days passed, Walter found himself paying closer attention to Lucy's world. He noticed that she often ate lunch alone, not from rejection, but by choice, reading books with the concentration of someone escaping into other worlds. He began timing his rounds to coincide with her recess, making sure she seemed content rather than lonely. On Wednesday, Lucy approached him during his afternoon cleaning routine, carrying a piece of paper folded into careful quarters. "I made you something," she said, unfolding the paper to reveal another crayon drawing. This one showed 3 stick figures, a tall one with a moustache, a medium one with long hair, and a small one with pigtails, standing in front of what looked like a school building. Above them, written in Lucy's careful block letters, were the words, "My family at work." Walter accepted the drawing with hands that weren't quite steady. "This is beautiful, Lucy." "Thank you. That's you, and me and my mom," Lucy explained, pointing to each figure. "I drew us at school because that's where we're all together. Mom picks me up every day and you're always here, so it's like we're all family here." The word family again, offered with the casual certainty of someone who believed that caring about people made them relatives. Walter studied the drawing, noting the careful details, the smile on each stick figure's face, the sun shining overhead, the flowers growing beside the school building. "Can I keep this?" he asked. "Of course," Lucy said, beaming with pride. "Maybe you could put it somewhere special, like how my mom puts my drawings on the refrigerator." That evening, Walter took the drawing home and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He moved one of Martha's photographs to make room on the kitchen counter, placing Lucy's artwork where he would see it every morning while he ate his toast. The stick figures smiled up at him, their crayon world bright with possibility. Friday brought the first real test of Walter's growing involvement in Lucy's life. He was mopping the main hallway when Mrs. Henderson appeared, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone dealing with a crisis. "Walter, thank goodness you're here," she said. "Lucy's running a fever and we can't reach her mother. Emma's not answering her phone at work, and Lucy says she might be at a doctor's appointment." Walter felt something shift inside him, a protective instinct he hadn't experienced since his own children were young. "Where is she?" "The nurse's office. She's asking for you specifically." Walter abandoned his mop and followed Mrs. Henderson down the hallway, his work boots squeaking against the freshly cleaned floors. In the nurse's office, Lucy sat on the examination table, looking small and miserable, her cheeks flushed with fever and her eyes too bright. "Mr. Walter," she said when she saw him, and the relief in her voice made something in his chest tighten. "I don't feel good, and Mom didn't answer the phone." The school nurse, a competent woman named Mrs. Chen, looked up from Lucy's file. "Her temperature is 101.2, and she says she has a stomach ache. Policy requires a parent or guardian to pick her up, but since we can't reach her mother, I can take her," Walter said without thinking, the words coming from some deep place of certainty. "I can drive her home and stay with her until her mother gets back." Mrs. Chen frowned. "Are you listed as an emergency contact?" Walter felt the weight of bureaucracy settling around them like fog. He wasn't listed as anything, not a relative, not a family friend, just the custodian who had somehow become important to a sick little girl. "No, but I want Mr. Walter to take me home," Lucy said, her small voice carrying the authority of someone who rarely asked for anything. "He came to my birthday party. He's family." There was something in the way she said it, matter-of-fact, unshakable, that seemed to convince Mrs. Chen more than any official paperwork could have. After a phone call to the principal and some creative interpretation of emergency protocols, Walter found himself helping Lucy gather her backpack and jacket. The drive to Lucy's apartment was quiet, except for her occasional sniffles and the soft sound of the radio playing songs from Walter's youth. Lucy sat in the passenger seat, looking even smaller than usual, her face pale despite the fever's flush. "My mom gets worried when she can't find me," Lucy said as Walter parked outside her apartment building. "We'll leave her a note," Walter assured, her fishing in his jacket pocket for a pen. On the back of a receipt he wrote, "Emma, Lucy got sick at school. Couldn't reach you. She's home safe with me. Call when you get this. Walter Thorne," followed by his phone number. Lucy's apartment, built different in the afternoon light, quieter, more fragile somehow. Walter helped her into pajamas, surprised by how naturally the caretaking role came back to him after all these years. He made her tea with honey the way Martha used to do for their children, and found children's Tylenol in the bathroom medicine. "Cabinet, can you read to me?" Lucy asked, curled up on the sofa under her favorite blanket. She handed him the fairy tale book he'd given her for her birthday, its pages already showing the wear of frequent reading. Walter settled into the chair beside the sofa and opened the book to Cinderella, reading in the same voice he'd once used for bedtime stories with Sarah and Michael. Lucy's eyes grew heavy as the fever medicine took effect, and she was asleep before he reached the part about the glass slipper. When Emma's key turned in the lock an hour later, Walter was still, sitting beside the sofa, watching Lucy sleep and thinking about the strange turns life could take. Emma appeared in the doorway, looking frantic, still wearing her waitress uniform and clutching the note he'd left. "How is she?" Emma asked, crossing to the sofa to feel Lucy's forehead with the practiced touch of motherhood. "Fever's down a bit," Walter reported quietly. "She had some tea and medicine, mostly just needs rest." Emma sank into the chair across from him, and Walter saw the exhaustion that went deeper than any double shift could explain. "I was at the oncologist," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of battles fought in sterile rooms with clipboard. Warriors. They had to run some additional tests. I turned my phone off and forgot to turn it back on. Walter nodded, understanding more than she knew. Lucy was asking for me specifically. The school called it family privilege. Emma's eyes filled with tears she was too tired to hide. "Thank you for being here. For her, I don't know what I would have done if—" She stopped, looking at her sleeping daughter with the fierce tenderness of someone who counted every moment as precious. "You don't have to thank me," Walter said quietly. "This is what people do for each other. But even as he said it, Walter knew it wasn't entirely true. This wasn't what people did, this was what family did, and somehow, without planning or discussion, that's what they had become. Lucy's drawing had been more accurate than he'd realized. They were family now, bound not by blood or law, but by something more fragile and more enduring, the choice to show up when needed. As Walter drove home that evening, Lucy's thank you drawing folded carefully in his wallet next to Martha's picture. He realized that for the first time in 3 years, he had somewhere to be besides work and home. Someone was counting on him, and that knowledge felt both terrifying and wonderful. The weekend brought more changes. Walter found himself driving past Murphy's diner on Saturday morning, noting Emma's car in the employee parking lot and wondering if she was pushing herself too hard. He stopped at the grocery store and bought ingredients for chicken soup, Martha's recipe that had cured countless childhood ailments in their house. On Sunday, he knocked on Lucy's apartment door with a covered pot and an excuse about making too much for one person. Emma answered wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweater, her hair pulled back carelessly, looking more relaxed than he'd seen her. "Walter, you didn't have to," she began. But Lucy appeared beside her, fully recovered and bouncing with 7-year-old energy. "Mr. Walter, did you bring soup? Mom said you might come over today and I drew you another picture." And so Walter found himself spending Sunday afternoon in Emma's small living room, watching Lucy color, while Emma rested on the sofa, the three of them settling into a comfortable domesticity that felt both new and familiar. Lucy chatted about school and friends, Emma occasionally adding details or corrections, and Walter found himself thinking that this was what happiness felt like when you weren't expecting it. The new drawing Lucy gave him that day showed the same 3 stick figures, but this time they were inside a house with a big kitchen and a dog running in the yard. At the top, in Lucy's careful letters, she had written, "Someday maybe." Walter folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his wallet next to the first, on understanding that he was collecting more than artwork. He was gathering proof of possibility, evidence that even in the autumn of life, new chapters could begin with something as simple as showing up when a child asked you to. October faded into November with the gradual certainty of changing seasons, and Walter found his life reshaping itself around rhythms he hadn't expected. What had begun as a single birthday party invitation had evolved into something more complex and necessary, a routine of showing up that felt as natural as breathing. The Martha's recipe box incident, as Walter came to think of it, happened on a grey Saturday morning when autumn rain drummed against his kitchen windows. He'd been going through Martha's things again, a ritual he performed every few months with the dedication of someone tending a shrine. Her recipe box sat on the counter, its faded floral pattern as familiar as her handwriting inside. Martha's chocolate chip cookies had been legendary in their neighborhood, the kind that brought children running when the scent drifted from open windows. Walter had watched her make them countless times, but had never attempted the recipe himself. Too many memories wrapped up in measuring cups and mixing bowls. But Lucy had mentioned missing homemade cookies at school, comparing the packaged ones in her lunch to memories of better times, and Walter found himself copying Martha's careful instructions onto a clean index card. If he was going to be part of this makeshift family, he reasoned, he should contribute something more than presents. The first batch burned, the second batch spread too thin across the cookie sheet. By the third attempt, Walter had found Martha's rhythm again, the careful balance of timing and temperature that transformed simple ingredients into comfort. The kitchen, filled with scents that carried him back 30 years, to Saturday mornings when his own children had begged for warm cookies and cold milk. He packaged the successful batch in an old tin that still held traces of Martha's Christmas. Fudge, adding a note that read simply, "From Martha's kitchen to yours, Walter." The gesture felt like a bridge between his past and present, a way of introducing the 2 most important parts of his life without forcing them to compete. When He knocked on Emma's apartment door that afternoon. Lucy answered with flour in her hair and chocolate on her chin. "We're making cookies too," she announced, pulling him into the small kitchen, where Emma stood at the counter, her movements careful but determined. "Mom's teaching me Grandma Rosa's recipe, but some of them look a little funny." Emma turned from the counter with a rueful smile, her face flushed from the oven's heat. "My grandmother would roll over in her grave if she saw what I've done to her snickerdoodles," she said, gesturing to a cooling rack filled with cookies of various shapes and sizes. "I'm better with diner coffee than fancy baking." Walter held out his tin of chocolate chip cookies, feeling suddenly uncertain about his offering. "I thought you might like these. They're my wife's recipe." Emma accepted the tin with hands that shook slightly. Whether from emotion or illness, Walter couldn't tell. She opened it carefully, breathing in the scent of vanilla and brown sugar. "They smell exactly like cookies should smell," she said softly, "like home." Lucy peered into the tin with the reverence of someone encountering treasure. "Can we try one now, please?" "Of course," Walter said, and watched as Lucy bit into a cookie with the serious concentration of a food critic. Her face lit up with delight. "These taste like hugs," Lucy declared, and Walter felt something warm expand in his chest. "Can you teach us how to make them?" And so Walter found himself in Emma's tiny kitchen, showing Lucy how to cream butter and sugar while Emma watched from her perch at the breakfast bar, too tired to stand for long periods, but eager to learn. It was domestic in a way that Walter hadn't experienced since Martha's death. Comfortable and purposeful. "Martha always said the secret was the vanilla extract," Walter explained, as Lucy stirred the batter with intense concentration. "She used real vanilla, never the imitation stuff, said you could taste the difference." "Tell us more about Martha," Emma said quietly, and Walter realized he'd been talking about his wife naturally, without the careful grief that usually accompanied her name. So Walter found himself sharing stories as they baked, about Martha's terrible singing voice and wonderful laugh, about the time she tried to surprise him with a birthday cake and accidentally used salt instead of sugar, about the way she could make any house feel like home just by arranging flowers in a mason jar. Lucy absorbed every detail with the hunger of someone collecting family stories, and Walter understood that in sharing Martha's recipes and memories, he was giving this child something precious, the knowledge that love could be passed down through simple acts of care. The conversation turned to Emma's own family, her grandmother Rosa, who had raised her in El Paso, the aunt in Phoenix who sent birthday cards but lived too far away to help with daily struggles. Lucy's father had never been in the picture, Emma explained without bitterness, just a young man who hadn't been ready for responsibility. "It's been just Lucy and me for so long," Emma said, watching her daughter measure flour with exaggerated precision. "Sometimes I worry she doesn't know what a real family looks like." Walter thought about the drawings Lucy had made, the stick figures holding hands under sunny skies, the careful way she included him in every picture. "She knows," he said quietly. "She understands better than most adults that family isn't just about blood." As the afternoon wore on, the three of them settled into an easy rhythm. Lucy chattered about school and friends while the cookies baked. Emma shared stories about difficult customers at the diner, and Walter found himself laughing more than he had in months when Mrs. Henderson called Monday morning to report that Lucy had shared homemade cookies with her entire class. Walter felt a pride that surprised him with its intensity. "She told everyone that her grandpa Walter made them," Mrs. Henderson said with a smile in her voice. "That little girl thinks the world of you." Grandpa Walter. The title hit him like a gentle shock, recognition of a role he'd grown into without realizing it. His own grandchildren lived so far away that he was more of a Christmas card memory than a daily presence, but Lucy had claimed him with the confidence of someone who knew what she needed. That evening, Walter called his daughter, Sarah in Seattle, something he rarely did outside their scheduled Sunday conversations. "Dad, is everything okay?" Sarah's voice carried the immediate concern of someone expecting bad news. "Everything's fine," Walter assured her. "Better than fine, actually. I wanted to tell you about someone special I've met, a little girl who's become important to me." As Walter told Sarah about Lucy and Emma, about birthday parties and homemade cookies, and the way a child's trust could transform a lonely man's world, he heard something he hadn't heard in his daughter's voice for years. Relief mixed with joy. "Dad, you sound different," Sarah said when he finished. "Happy, really happy, not just okay happy." Walter looked at Lucy's drawings on his refrigerator, at Martha's recipe box still open on the counter, at the evidence of a life that was becoming fuller instead of emptier. "I am happy," he realized, and meant it completely. "For the first time in a long time, I wake up with somewhere to be and someone who needs me. It changes everything." After they hung up, Walter sat in his kitchen surrounded by the lingering scent of vanilla and butter, understanding that he had crossed some invisible line between before and after. Lucy had given him more than friendship. She had given him purpose, a reason to be more than just a man, waiting for retirement, and whatever came after. Tomorrow would bring another day of mopping floors and replacing light bulbs, but it would also bring Lucy's smile and Emma's grateful thanks, and the knowledge that he mattered to someone small and fierce and full of hope. Outside his window, November wind rattled the maple tree's bare branches, but inside, Walter's house felt warmer than it had in years. The letter arrived on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday, until Walter found Emma hunched over her kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, writing with the desperate concentration of someone racing against time. He had stopped by after his evening shift to drop off groceries, a habit that had developed naturally over the past month, and found the apartment unusually quiet. Lucy was asleep, her breathing soft, and even from the bedroom she shared with her mother. But Emma sat at the small table, surrounded by crumpled papers and tear-stained drafts of something that seemed to be causing her immense pain to write. "Emma?" Walter knocked softly on the already open door, not wanting to startle her. "Everything okay?" She looked up, and Walter saw exhaustion etched so deeply in her face that it seemed carved there permanently. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she wore an old sweater that had seen better years, but it was her eyes that concerned him, hollow with the kind of grief that came from facing impossible choices. "Walter, I didn't hear you come in." Emma hastily gathered the papers, but not before Walter caught a glimpse of his own name, written in her careful script. "I was just writing letters," Walter finished gently, settling into the chair across from her without invitation. After weeks of shared meals and comfortable silences, formal courtesy had given way to the easier intimacy of chosen family. "Want to talk about it?" Emma's composure cracked like ice over deep water. "The doctors want to start more aggressive treatment," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Chemotherapy that will make me sicker before it might make me better." "If it makes me better at all," Walter felt his heart contract. "What are the odds? 30% chance of buying me another year, maybe 2. Emma's laugh was bitter and broken. 70% chance I'll spend what time I have left being too sick to take care of Lucy, too weak to be the mother she needs. The mathematics of mortality, Walter thought. Numbers that reduced a life to percentages and probabilities, as if love could be calculated in statistics. "What does your heart tell you?" "My heart tells me to fight," Emma said fiercely, "to try everything, to never give up, to believe in miracles because she needs me to." She gestured toward Lucy's bedroom door. "But my brain tells me that quality matters more than quantity. That being present and aware for 6 months is better than being absent but alive for 18. Walter studied the woman across from him, seeing the terrible courage it took to make such choices. Emma wasn't just facing death. She was facing the responsibility of making decisions that would shape her daughter's memories forever. "And the letters?" he asked quietly. Emma's hand moved protectively over the papers. "For Lucy, for her future birthdays, her first day of high school, her wedding day, graduation, all the moments I won't be here for." Her voice broke completely. "I want her to know how proud I am, How much I love her. How sorry I am that I can't stay. The enormity of it hit Walter like a physical blow. Here was a mother trying to compress a lifetime of love and guidance into words on paper, attempting to parent from beyond the grave through carefully crafted letters. The dedication and heartbreak of it left him speechless. "I've been working on this one for weeks," Emma continued, holding up a sheet of paper covered in her neat handwriting. "It's for when she's older, when she might have questions about choices and sacrifice and what it means to be brave. But how do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes loving someone means letting them go?" Walter reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You don't explain it to a 7-year-old, he said gently. "You explain it to the woman she'll become, and you trust that the love you've already given her will carry her through until she's ready to understand." Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face with the relief of being understood. "I'm so scared, Walter, not of dying. I've made peace with that. I'm scared of leaving her alone, of her growing up without anyone who remembers how she took her steps, or what songs I used to sing to her when she couldn't sleep." The weight of Emma's fear settled between them like a living thing. Walter thought of his own children, grown and distant, but secure in the knowledge that they were loved and remembered. Lucy faced a different future, one where the keeper of her childhood memories would be gone, leaving her to grow up with strangers who would never know the sound of her first laugh, or the way she insisted on wearing her red shoes, even when they didn't match her outfit. "She won't be alone," Walter said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I know her songs, Emma. I know about the red shoes and the way she counts her cereal pieces before eating them. I know she's afraid of thunderstorms but loves the rain, and that she still sleeps with that stuffed elephant, even though she thinks she's getting too old for it." Emma stared at him with something that might have been hope beginning to kindle in her eyes. "You've been watching." "I've been learning," Walter corrected, "because she matters to me, because you both matter to me in ways I didn't expect and can't fully explain." They sat in silence for a long moment, the kitchen clock ticking away seconds that felt both precious and inadequate. Outside, November wind rattled the windows with the promise of winter coming, but inside, something warm and necessary was taking root. "The treatment," Walter said finally. "What does your doctor recommend?" "Dr. Martinez, no relation, just coincidence, thinks I should try it. She says I'm stronger than I look, that I might surprise everyone." Emma's smile was watery but genuine. "But she also says it's ultimately my choice, and either way I need to make arrangements for Lucy." The unspoken question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Walter could feel the weight of possibility, the enormous responsibility that Emma was considering placing in his weathered hands. "I've been thinking," Emma continued carefully, "about guardianship, about who could take care of Lucy if something happens to me. My sister Carol would try, but she has 3 kids of her own and barely makes ends meet. There's my aunt in Phoenix, but Lucy doesn't really know her." Walter found himself holding his breath, understanding that this conversation was changing the trajectory of both their lives in ways that couldn't be undone. "And then there's you," Emma said softly. "Lucy loves you, Walter. She trusts you. And I've watched you with her. You're not just kind, you're careful. You pay attention to details that other people miss. You remember what matters to her." The magnitude of what she was suggesting settled over Walter like snow, gentle at first, then accumulating into something that would transform the landscape of his existence entirely. "Emma," he began, but she held up her hand. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," she said quickly. "I know it's enormous and unfair and not what you signed up for when you came to a little girl's birthday party, but I needed you to know that when I think about Lucy's future, when I try to imagine her with someone who will love her and protect her and help her remember who she is, I think of you." Walter looked at the letters spread across the table, at this young mother's desperate attempt to remain present in her daughter's life, even after death claimed her. He thought about Lucy's drawings on his refrigerator, about the way she had claimed him as family, with the unconscious certainty of someone who recognized love when she saw it. "Can I ask you something?" Walter said finally. Emma nodded. "If the treatment works, if you get more time, would you still want me around? Not as a guardian, just as—" He struggled to find words for what they had become. "As family?" Emma's smile was radiant despite her tears. "Walter, whether I have 6 months or 6 years, I can't imagine Lucy's life without you in it. You've become part of her story, part of who she is. That doesn't change regardless of what happens to me." As Walter drove home through the quiet streets of Maplewood that night, Emma's letter tucked safely in his jacket pocket. She had asked him to keep it, to add his own words if he felt called to do so. He realized that he had arrived at a crossroads he never expected to face. At 64, he was being offered the chance to be a father again, to step into the enormous responsibility of raising a child who had already claimed his heart. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure, but as he turned into his driveway and saw the warm light from his kitchen window, where Lucy's drawings waited on the refrigerator, Walter knew that the choice had already been made. It had been made the moment a 6-year-old girl had handed him a birthday invitation and asked him to make her mother smile. Now all that remained was finding the courage to say yes. The small purple shoebox appeared on Walter's kitchen counter on a Saturday morning in early December, carried by Lucy with the ceremonial gravity of someone transporting precious cargo. She had asked if she could show him something special, and Walter had watched with growing curiosity as she carefully removed the lid to reveal what looked like a child's version of a treasure chest. "This is my memory box," Lucy announced, settling herself at the table with the same serious concentration she brought to her homework. "Mom helped me make it to keep special things that make me happy when I look at them." Walter peered into the box with appropriate reverence, understanding that he was being granted access to something sacred in Lucy's 7-year-old world. Inside, arranged with careful precision, were the artifacts of their growing friendship. A napkin from her birthday party with chocolate frosting still faintly visible, a ticket stub from the children's movie they'd seen together the previous weekend, 3 smooth stones from their walk around Maplewood Park, and a small photograph that made Walter's breath catch. The picture showed the 3 of them at Thanksgiving dinner in Emma's apartment. Walter carving the turkey he'd brought, Emma smiling despite her obvious fatigue, and Lucy between them with gravy on her chin and pure joy on her face. Walter's daughter Sarah had taken the photo during her surprise visit, capturing a moment that looked exactly like family, despite having no biological foundation. "When did you get this printed?" Walter asked, holding the photograph carefully. "Mom took it to the drugstore," Lucy said, pulling out another treasure, a child-sized oven mitt that Walter had bought her so she could help with cooking. "She said important moments need pictures so they don't get lost in our minds." Walter understood what Emma had been doing, creating tangible memories that would outlast her physical presence. Every small adventure, every ordinary moment was being documented and preserved for Lucy's future reference, proof that she had been loved completely, if not for long enough. "Tell me about each thing," Walter said, settling back in his chair with the patience he'd learned from raising his own children decades ago. Lucy's face lit up with the joy of having an engaged audience. She lifted each item with reverence, sharing the story behind every treasure. The movie ticket was from The Princess and the Frog, which they'd watched while Emma rested at home after a particularly difficult chemotherapy session. The smooth stones were from their adventure walk, as Lucy called it, when Walter had taught her to skip rocks on Maplewood Creek. "And this," Lucy said, pulling out a folded piece of paper that Walter recognized as another of her drawings, "is my favorite one because it shows what we really are." Walter unfolded the paper to reveal 3 stick figures standing in front of a house, but this drawing was different from the others. Instead of the simple crayon work of her earlier pictures, Lucy had used markers and colored pencils to create something more detailed and deliberate. The figures had faces with expressions, the house had windows with curtains, and there were flowers in the garden that looked almost real. But it was the words at the bottom that made Walter's throat tighten. My chosen family, written in Lucy's careful block letters. Mrs. Henderson taught us about different kinds of families at school, Lucy explained, not noticing Walter's emotional reaction. Some families are born together, and some families choose each other. She said chosen families are just as real. As born families, maybe even more special, because they picked each other on purpose. Walter studied the drawing, noting how Lucy had positioned the figures, close together but distinct, each one necessary to complete the picture. In her 7-year-old wisdom, she had captured something that adults often struggle to understand. Family wasn't about bloodlines or legal documents, but about showing up consistently with love and care. "What made you think of us as a chosen family?" Walter asked gently. Lucy considered this question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "Well, you didn't have to come to my birthday party, but you did. And you didn't have to help when I got sick at school, but you did. And when Mom has bad days, you bring soup and help with groceries and don't act like it's hard to do." She pulled out another item from the box, a small wooden elephant that Walter recognized as the prize from the school carnival they'd attended together. "And you remember things about me, like how I collect elephants and don't like onions in my soup. Mom says people only remember details about people they really love." The simple truth of it hit Walter like sunlight breaking through clouds. In Lucy's clear-eyed assessment, love was measured not in grand gestures, but in consistent small kindnesses, in remembering preferences and showing up when needed. By her definition, they had indeed become family through the accumulation of ordinary moments, made extraordinary by attention and care. "There's one more thing," Lucy said, reaching deep into the box to retrieve something wrapped in tissue paper. "I made this for you, but Mom said I should wait for the right time to give it to you." Walter unwrapped the tissue to reveal a ceramic. Handprint painted in bright blue with Grandpa Walter spelled out in yellow letters around the palm. It was clearly a school art project, the kind that teachers assigned around Father's Day or grandparents' visitation. But seeing it made Walter understand that Lucy had claimed him officially in the most public way possible. "I made it in art." "Class, when Mrs. Patterson said we should make something for someone special," Lucy explained. "All the other kids made them for their real grandpas, but I made mine for you because you're the grandpa I actually know." Walter held the small ceramic handprint, feeling the weight of 7 years of life pressed into clay, and realized that he was holding proof of his transformation. Somewhere in the past few months, he had evolved from a lonely widower marking time until retirement into someone's chosen grandfather, someone essential to a child's sense of security and belonging. "Lucy," he said carefully, "what would you think if I told you that you and your mom have become the most important people in my life? That being your grandpa, even if it's not official, is the best job I've ever had." Lucy's smile could have powered the December lights that twinkled in windows throughout Maplewood. "I'd think that's perfect," she said simply, "because you and Mom are the most important people in my life too, and now we're all each other's most important people." The mathematical precision of childhood logic, Walter thought with deep affection. Lucy had worked out the emotional equation with the clarity that adults often lost in overthinking. If everyone in the group was each other's priority, then they formed something complete and sustainable. That evening, Walter called his son Michael in Denver, something he rarely did outside their scheduled conversations. "Dad?" Michael's voice carried surprise, tinged with concern. "Everything okay? Everything's wonderful," Walter said, looking at Lucy's handprint where it now sat on his mantelpiece next to Martha's photograph. "I wanted to tell you about your new sister." As Walter shared Lucy's story, he heard something in Michael's voice that he hadn't heard since his son was young. Genuine excitement about his father's life. Relief that the man who had raised him was finding purpose again instead of simply enduring. "She sounds incredible, Dad," Michael said when Walter finished describing Lucy's memory box and chosen family drawing. "When can I meet her?" "Soon," Walter promised, understanding that his transformation was rippling outward, bringing his scattered family closer through the gravitational pull of a 7-year-old's unconditional love. After they hung up, Walter sat in his living room, surrounded by the evidence of his new life. Lucy's drawings on the refrigerator, Emma's medical appointment cards he'd helped organize, the ceramic handprint that proclaimed his chosen role in a child's world. Outside, December snow began falling in fat, lazy flakes. But inside, Walter's house felt fuller and warmer than it had in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Emma's treatment continued, and the practical realities of guardianship conversations moved closer to actual decisions. But tonight, Walter simply sat with the knowledge that he was loved specifically and intentionally by someone who had looked at all her options for grandfather figures and chosen him. It was, he realized, the greatest honor of his 64 years. The medal lay forgotten in the back of Walter's bedroom closet, buried beneath winter coats and boxes of Christmas decorations that hadn't seen daylight since Martha died. He'd been searching for his formal suit. Emma had asked him to accompany her to a legal appointment about guardianship papers, when his fingers brushed against the small, velvet box that held remnants of a life he'd carefully locked away. Walter hadn't thought about his military service in years. 24 years in the army, including 2 tours in Vietnam and a final decade training younger soldiers in combat tactics, felt like someone else's story now. He'd come home, married Martha, raised children, and transformed himself into the kind of man who fixed leaky faucets instead of dismantling enemy positions. But the bronze star with Valor device nestled in its faded box represented skills that, once learned, were never completely forgotten. As Walter held the medal, memories surfaced unbidden: night patrols through hostile territory, the hypervigilance that had kept his unit alive, the ability to assess threats and respond with decisive action. He was still staring at the medal when his phone rang with a call that would make those old skills suddenly, terrifyingly relevant. "Walter?" Emma's voice was tight with panic. "Are you home? Can you come over right now? Please?" Walter was in his truck within minutes, driving through the December afternoon with the focused intensity of someone responding to a crisis. He found Emma's apartment door standing open, voices echoing from inside. Emma's strained and defensive, another voice male and aggressive. Walter climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his body remembering patterns of movement that belonged to a different version of himself. In the doorway, he paused to assess the situation with tactical awareness he hadn't accessed in decades. Emma stood in her living room, clutching Lucy protectively against her side, facing a man Walter didn't recognize, but immediately disliked. The stranger was tall and thick-bodied, wearing expensive clothes that couldn't disguise the underlying menace in his posture. His graying hair was slicked back, his face flushed with alcohol or anger, possibly both. Lucy pressed against her. Mother, with the instinctive fear of a child who recognized danger even when she didn't understand its source. Her dark eyes were wide with confusion and terror. "Emma," Walter said quietly, stepping into the apartment with the controlled movements of someone prepared for violence. "Everything all right here?" The stranger turned, sizing Walter up with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to intimidation. "And you are?" "Walter Thorne," Walter replied, not moving closer, but positioning himself strategically between the man and the door. "Friend of the family." "You?" "Robert Martinez," the man said with a smile that held no warmth. "Emma's father, Lucy's grandfather. The only real family these girls have." Walter felt something cold settle in his chest. Emma had mentioned her estranged father exactly once, in the context of explaining why Lucy had no extended family support. The conversation had been brief and painful, something about drinking and violence and the reasons why Emma had moved across the country to get away from her childhood. "Daddy," Emma said, her voice carefully controlled, "I told you we could. talk tomorrow. Lucy has school in the morning, and she doesn't need to hear—" "Lucy needs to hear the truth," Robert interrupted, his voice rising. "She needs to know that her grandfather is here to take care of her, to make sure she grows up with her real family instead of—" He gestured dismissively at Walter. "Whatever this is." Walter had been in enough volatile situations to recognize the signs. Robert Martinez was drunk, angry, and looking for a fight. More troubling, he had the confidence of someone who believed he held all the power in this confrontation. "How did you find us?" Emma asked, and Walter heard the fear she was trying to hide from Lucy. "Facebook," Robert said with satisfaction. "Your sister Carol posts pictures of family gatherings. Wasn't hard to track you down once I knew what town you were hiding in." Walter's mind catalogued details with military precision. Robert's dilated pupils suggested recent drug use in addition to alcohol. His expensive watch and clothes indicated financial resources. The way he positioned himself near the kitchen suggested familiarity with using confined spaces to intimidate. Most concerning was the casual way he dismissed Emma's obvious terror. This was a man accustomed to controlling through fear. "What do you want, Daddy?" Emma's voice shook despite her efforts to appear calm. "What I want is to meet my granddaughter properly," Robert said, turning his attention to Lucy with a smile that made Walter's skin crawl. "Come here, little girl. Let your real grandfather get a look at you." Lucy pressed closer to Emma, shaking her head silently. "She's shy," Emma said quickly. "She doesn't know you, and you're being very loud." "She doesn't know me because you stole her away," Robert snapped, his mask of grandfatherly affection dropping immediately. "Because you filled her head with lies about her family, but I'm here now, and things are going to change." Walter felt his combat instincts fully activate. The hyper-awareness of threat assessment, the calculation of response options, the cold clarity that had kept him alive in hostile territory. Robert Martinez wasn't just drunk and angry. He was dangerous. "Maybe we should all sit down and talk about this calmly," Walter suggested, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to diffusing tense situations. "I don't need to talk to you at all," Robert said, turning his attention fully to Walter for the first time. "In fact, you should leave. This is family business." "Walter stays," Emma said firmly, surprising everyone, including herself, with the steel in her voice. "He's Lucy's guardian if something happens to me. He has every right to be here." The color drained from Robert's face, then returned as a flush of rage. "Guardian? You gave guardianship to some stranger instead of your own." "Father?" "You're not my father," Emma said quietly. "Fathers don't break their daughters' ribs when they're 16. Fathers don't steal money from their children's college funds to buy drugs. Fathers don't disappear for 2 years and then show up demanding rights they never earned." Walter's military training had included interrogation techniques, which meant he was skilled at reading people under stress. What he saw in Robert Martinez was more dangerous than simple anger. It was the entitled rage of someone who had lost control and was prepared to use violence to get it back. "That's ancient history," Robert said, but his voice carried the hollow ring of someone who knew his own lies. "I've changed. I'm clean now. Got my life together. Got a lawyer too, Emma. A real good lawyer who says blood relatives have rights that can't be signed away to strangers." The threat was clear and legally sophisticated. Walter realized they weren't dealing with a desperate alcoholic making empty threats, but someone who had done research and preparation. "Lucy," Walter said quietly, "why don't you go to your room and get that book we were reading yesterday? I'll come read to you in a few minutes." Lucy looked between her mother and Walter, with the wisdom of a child who had learned to navigate adult tensions. She nodded silently and disappeared into her bedroom, closing the door behind her. With Lucy safely out of earshot, the 3 adults faced each other in Emma's small living room. Walter positioned himself where he could see both Robert and the hallway to Lucy's room, while Emma remained near the kitchen counter where she'd been preparing dinner when her father arrived. "Here's what's going to happen," Robert said, with the confidence of someone delivering a prepared speech. "Emma's dying. Don't look so surprised. I know about the cancer. When she's gone, Lucy's going to need family, real family. My lawyer says we can challenge any guardianship arrangement, especially if it's some old man with no legal relationship to the child." Walter felt the familiar calm of impending conflict settle over him. In Vietnam, this feeling had preceded firefights and night raids. Now it preceded the most important battle of his civilian life. "And if Emma fights you?" Walter asked quietly. Robert's smile was ugly. "Emma can't fight anything from a hospital bed. But she could make this easier on everyone, especially Lucy, by doing the right thing now." The implied threat hung in the air like smoke. Walter understood the dynamic now. Robert had waited until Emma was weakest to make his move, calculating that her illness would limit her ability to resist. "Get out," Emma said, her voice stronger than Walter had heard it in weeks. "Get out of my home and stay away from my daughter." "Our daughter will be staying with me after you're gone," Robert replied casually. "The question is whether you want to fight it and put her through a custody battle, or accept reality and make the transition easier." Walter made a decision that would have surprised his younger self, but felt completely natural to the man he'd become. "Before you make any legal moves," he said carefully, "you should know that I'm not just some random stranger. I have resources, connections, and experience that might complicate your plans." It wasn't entirely true. Walter's military service had been honorable but not high profile, but Robert didn't need to know the details. What mattered was establishing that any fight wouldn't be the easy victory Robert was expecting. "What kind of experience?" Robert asked, his confidence wavering slightly. Walter pulled the bronze star from his pocket, letting it catch the overhead light. "The kind that taught me to protect what matters most. The kind that means I don't back down from bullies, regardless of their legal resources." Robert stared at the medal, clearly recognizing its significance even if he didn't understand the full implications. "You threatening me, old man?" "I'm informing you," Walter replied, with the calm precision of someone stating facts. "Lucy has a family that loves her and will fight for her. If you want a war, you'll get one. But you should know that you won't be fighting a grieving single mother and a lonely old man. You'll be fighting people with experience, resources, and nothing left to lose." The standoff stretched between them like a taut wire. Robert Martinez had come expecting easy intimidation and found himself facing unexpected resistance. Walter could see him recalculating, weighing his options against opposition he hadn't anticipated. "This isn't over," Robert said finally. The classic retreat line of someone who had overplayed his hand. "I'll be back with my lawyer, and we'll see what a judge thinks about some stranger trying to steal a man's granddaughter." "Looking forward to it," Walter replied, and meant it completely. After Robert left, Emma collapsed onto her sofa with the boneless exhaustion of someone who had used every reserve of strength to survive a crisis. Walter locked the door and checked the windows, his mind already working on security measures and contingency plans. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I should have warned you he might show up. I hoped you hoped he'd changed," Walter finished. "That's not foolish, Emma, that's love. But now we know what we're dealing with and we can plan accordingly." Lucy emerged from her bedroom carrying the fairy tale book, her face pale but trusting. "Is the scary man gone?" "He's gone," Walter confirmed, gathering her into his arms with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had found his hill to die on. "And Grandpa Walter is going to make sure he stays gone." As Emma tucked Lucy into bed that night, Walter sat at the kitchen table, researching family law and custody rights, his bronze star lying beside his laptop like a talisman. He'd spent 3 years learning to live without purpose, drifting through empty days in a house full of memories. Now he had something to fight for again, and Robert Martinez was about to learn that some old soldiers never really retire, they just wait for a war worth winning. The video camera setup looked professional despite its humble origins. Walter's old smartphone propped against a stack of books on Emma's kitchen table. the afternoon light streaming through the window providing natural illumination that would have cost hundreds of dollars to replicate in a studio. Emma sat across from the makeshift recording station, wearing her favorite blue sweater and a brave smile that fooled no one, least of all the 7-year-old girl who was helping operate the technology. "Is it recording, Grandpa Walter?" Lucy asked, peering at the phone screen with the intense concentration she brought to all important tasks. In the 2 weeks since Robert Martinez's threatening visit, she had appointed herself as Walter's assistant in what she understood to be important grown-up business, though the full implications remained mercifully beyond her comprehension. "Recording," Walter confirmed, checking the audio levels one more time. Emma's idea to create video messages for Lucy's future had evolved from desperate necessity into something more intentional and healing, a way to ensure that her daughter would never doubt how completely she was loved, even when memory began to fade. "Okay, baby girl," Emma said, speaking directly to the camera with the casual intimacy of someone addressing a beloved friend. "This one is for your 16th birthday, which feels both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. By now you probably know more about makeup and boys than I ever did, and I'm hoping Grandpa Walter has managed not to embarrass you too badly when you bring dates to the house." Walter, monitoring the recording from behind the camera, felt his throat tighten. In Emma's casual reference to the house and his future interactions with teenage Lucy, he heard assumptions about permanence that he prayed would prove accurate. The legal battle with Robert Martinez was escalating daily, and the outcome remained frighteningly uncertain. Emma continued her message with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this for weeks. She spoke about the values she hoped to instill, about the importance of kindness over popularity, about choosing friends who saw her worth rather than her usefulness. She shared memories of Lucy's childhood, the way she used to insist on wearing her tutu to grocery stores, her phase of collecting smooth stones, her habit of naming every stuffed animal after characters from fairy tales. "And if you're watching this feeling sad or angry or confused about why I'm not there," Emma said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "I want you to look at the man behind the camera. Look at Grandpa Walter, who didn't have to love us but chose to anyway. Look at his hands. Those are the hands that taught you to tie your shoes and helped you with your homework and held you when you had nightmares. Those are the hands of someone who kept every promise he ever made to you." Walter had to stop recording and step away from the camera, overwhelmed by the weight of Emma's faith in him. Through the kitchen window, he could see December snow beginning to fall, and he thought about the legal documents spread across his dining room table at home: guardianship papers, character references, financial statements that proved his ability to provide for a child. The custody battle had become consuming in ways Walter hadn't anticipated. Robert Martinez's lawyer had indeed proven competent, filing motions that challenged everything from Walter's age to his lack of blood relation to his fitness as a single guardian. Each legal response required documentation that felt like excavating his entire life for public examination. Lucy's voice brought him back to the present. "Grandpa Walter, are you crying?" "Happy tears," Walter assured her, returning to the camera with the determined smile of someone refusing to let fear contaminate hope. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they feel very lucky. Like how I cried when I got my bike for Christmas?" Lucy asked, and Walter nodded, understanding that children processed overwhelming emotion through familiar comparisons. The video sessions had become their routine over the past 2 weeks, usually in the afternoons, when Emma felt strongest and Lucy was home from school. Walter had learned to operate the camera equipment with the same methodical attention to detail he brought to his custodial work, understanding that these recordings would become precious artifacts in Lucy's future. Today's session was different, though. Emma had asked Walter to record a special message, not for Lucy's distant future, but for him, to be watched only if the legal battle went badly and Lucy was forced to live with her grandfather. "You don't have to do this," Walter had told Emma when she first proposed the idea. "We're going to win. The judge is going to see that Robert Martinez is exactly what he appears to be, a manipulative man using a sick woman's weakness to claim a child he's never bothered to know." But Emma had insisted, with the pragmatic fatalism of someone who had learned not to count on favorable outcomes. "I need to know that even if the worst happens, Lucy will understand why we made the choices we made. And I need her to know that you didn't abandon her, that you would have fought harder if you could have." Now, as Lucy played in her bedroom and Emma prepared to record what might be her most important message, Walter felt the weight of everything they stood to lose pressing down like a physical force. "Are you ready?" Emma asked, positioning herself in front of the camera with the composure of someone delivering a final statement. Walter nodded and pressed record, then settled back to witness Emma's attempt to compress a lifetime of love and guidance into words that would have to last forever. "Walter," Emma began, speaking directly to the camera with eyes that seemed to see through the lens to some future moment of desperate need. "If you're watching this, it means things didn't go the way we hoped. It means Lucy is living with my father, and you're probably blaming yourself for not being able to protect her." Walter's hand trembled slightly as he held the phone steady, struck by Emma's ability to anticipate his future guilt with such precision. "I want you to know that none of this is your fault," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. "You didn't ask to become part of our lives, but when we needed you most, you showed up. You showed up for a birthday party, for a sick day at school, for grocery shopping and homework help and all the ordinary moments that make a family." She paused, gathering herself for what came next. "Lucy loves you, Walter. Not because she has to, not because you're convenient, but because you earned that love through consistency and kindness and the 1,000 small ways you proved that she mattered to you." Walter had to close his eyes, overwhelmed by the responsibility Emma was placing on his shoulders, not just the legal obligation of guardianship, but the emotional burden of being Lucy's anchor in whatever storms lay ahead. "If Robert wins custody," Emma said, her voice carefully controlled, "I need you to know that the fight was worth it. Every day Lucy spent feeling truly loved, every moment she experienced what real family looks like. Those things can't be taken away by court orders. They're part of who she is now." The video continued for another 10 minutes, Emma speaking with the desperate eloquence of someone trying to fit a lifetime of instruction into a single recording. She talked about Lucy's preferences and fears, about the importance of maintaining connections to her school and community, about the ways Walter could continue to be part of her life, even from a distance, if necessary. But it was her final words that would haunt Walter for weeks to come. "Don't let my father convince Lucy that she wasn't worth fighting for. Don't let him rewrite our story or diminish what we built together. Whatever happens, she needs to know that for a little while she had everything a child should have, a mother who loved her completely and a grandfather who chose her deliberately." After Emma finished recording, they sat in the kitchen sharing coffee and the comfortable silence of people who had said everything that needed saying. Lucy emerged from her room carrying her latest drawing, another stick-figure family, but this one included a fourth figure with grey hair and a moustache, labeled Robert, standing apart from the other three. "I don't want him to take me away from you," Lucy said, with the direct honesty that children use to address their deepest fears. "He's scary, and he doesn't know about my elephant collection, or that I don't like crusts on my sandwiches." Walter knelt to Lucy's eye level, taking her small hands in his weathered ones. "Lucy, I want you to listen to me very carefully. No matter what happens in the grown-up meetings with lawyers and judges, nothing can change the fact that you are my chosen granddaughter and I am your chosen grandfather. Do you understand?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "Like how nothing can change that the sky is blue or that flowers grow from seeds?" "Exactly like that," Walter confirmed. "Some things are just true, regardless of what anyone says about them." That evening, after Lucy was asleep, and Emma had retired early with the exhaustion that came from emotional investment. Walter drove home through the December night, thinking about permanence and choice, about the families we're born into and the families we create. At his kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and character references, he reviewed the strategy his lawyer had outlined for the upcoming custody hearing. They had strong arguments. Emma's clear wishes, Lucy's obvious attachment to Walter, Robert Martinez's history of violence and neglect. But family court was unpredictable, and blood relationships carried weight that chosen bonds sometimes couldn't match. Walter's phone rang just after 11, Emma's name appearing on the screen with the ominous timing of late-night calls. "Walter." Emma's voice was weak but urgent. "I think I need to go to the hospital. The pain is worse, and I'm having trouble breathing." "But Lucy—" "I'll be right there," Walter interrupted, already reaching for his keys. "Don't worry about Lucy. They'll take care of everything." As he drove through the empty streets toward Emma's apartment, Walter understood that the crisis they'd been preparing for had arrived ahead of schedule. Whatever came next, hospital visits, emergency guardianship arrangements, accelerated legal proceedings, would unfold against the backdrop of Emma's declining health and Lucy's growing need for stability. But as Walter pulled into the apartment, complex parking lot, and saw Lucy's bedroom light still on, he felt the calm certainty that had carried him through combat zones and family emergencies decades ago. Some battles chose you, and once chosen, the only honorable response was to fight. With everything you had, tonight that fight began in earnest. The envelope lay on Walter's kitchen table like a loaded gun. Emma's handwriting across the front, spelling out his name in careful script that had grown shakier over the past weeks of hospitalizations and emergency treatments. She had pressed it into his hands 3 days ago, during what they both understood might be their final private conversation. Her fingers barely strong enough to maintain their grip. "Don't open it unless," Emma had whispered from her hospital bed, oxygen tubes making speech difficult but not impossible. "You'll know when." Now, at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday that felt suspended between endings and beginnings, Walter knew. The call had come an hour ago. Emma's breathing had grown labored during the night, and the hospice nurse suggested he bring Lucy to say goodbye while there was still time. Lucy slept curled against Walter's side in the uncomfortable hospital chair, her small body radiating the trusting warmth of someone who had learned that Grandpa Walter's presence meant safety, even in places that smelled like disinfectant and fear. She had been brave beyond her 7 years, reading to her mother from fairy tale books and sharing drawings that showed stick-figure families living happily ever after. Emma's breathing had grown quiet 20 minutes ago. The struggle finally, ending with a peace that seemed to settle over the room like benediction. Lucy had been asleep then, sparing her the final moments that would have been too much for any child to carry. Now Walter sat in the grey pre-dawn light, holding Lucy while she slept, and knowing that when she woke, everything would be different. The envelope in his jacket pocket felt heavier than paper should, weighted with final words that Emma had needed him to hear when the theoretical became devastatingly real. "Grandpa Walter." Lucy's voice was small and confused, the disorientation of waking in an unfamiliar place evident in her tone. "Where's Mommy?" Walter's throat closed completely. In all his years of parenting and living, nothing had prepared him for this moment. How to tell a child that the center of her universe had quietly slipped away while she dreamed. "Lucy, sweetheart," Walter managed, his voice rough with grief and responsibility. "Mommy was very sick, and her body got too tired to keep fighting. She died peacefully while you were sleeping, and I know she was happy that you were here with her." Lucy sat up in Walter's lap, looking toward the hospital bed where Emma lay still and small under white sheets. The monitors had been turned off, the medical machinery that had sustained life reduced to silent testimony of battles fought and ultimately lost. "Is she still my mommy even if she's dead?" Lucy asked, with the practical logic that children used. To navigate impossible concepts, she will always be your mummy, Walter assured her, pulling her closer. Death doesn't change love, Lucy. Your mummy loved you completely, and that love stays with you forever, even when her body couldn't. Lucy nodded with the solemn acceptance of someone who had been preparing for this moment without fully understanding it. And you're still my grandpa, Walter? I am still your grandpa, Walter, Walter confirmed, feeling the weight of promises made and kept settling around them both. Now and always, no matter what anyone says or does. The next hours blurred together in the surreal choreography of death's aftermath. Hospital staff moving with practiced efficiency, phone calls to funeral homes and lawyers, the gentle removal of Emma's body while Lucy sat in the hallway, drawing pictures of angels with her mother's face. Walter found himself making decisions with the automatic competence of someone who had handled crises before, but every choice felt enormous under the weight of Lucy's watchful eyes. She was studying him, he realized, learning whether the adults in her life could be trusted to function when everything fell apart. Back at Emma's apartment, which would now become Lucy's former home, pending the custody decisions that suddenly felt more urgent than academic, Walter finally opened Emma's letter. Lucy was napping on the sofa, exhausted by grief she couldn't fully process, leaving Walter alone with final words from the woman who had trusted him with her most precious gift. Walter, the letter began, if you're reading this, then Lucy is now officially an orphan, and you are officially the most important person in her world. I know this isn't what you planned when you came to a little girl's birthday party 6 months ago, but life rarely asks our permission before changing everything. Walter's eyes blurred as he continued reading Emma's careful instructions about Lucy's routines and preferences, her fears and joys, the small details that would matter enormously in the days ahead. But it was Emma's final paragraph that broke him completely. I need you to know that watching you love Lucy has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. You didn't just become her grandfather, you became the father I never had, the safe harbor I always wished existed. Thank you for showing both of us what real family looks like. Thank you for proving that some people keep their promises even when keeping them costs everything. Walter sat in Emma's kitchen, surrounded by the life she had built for herself and Lucy, and understood that he was now the sole guardian of not just a child, but of all the love and hope and careful planning that Emma had invested in their shared future. Tomorrow would bring Robert Martinez and his lawyers, custody battles, and character assassinations, the brutal process of proving in court what everyone who mattered already knew, that Lucy belonged with the man who had chosen to love her unconditionally. But tonight, Walter simply held vigil over a sleeping child who trusted him completely. Emma's letter pressed against his heart like a talisman against the battles ahead. The family courthouse on Maple Street had seen better decades, its oak-paneled walls and high ceilings speaking to an era when justice moved more slowly and with greater ceremony. Walter sat at the plaintiff's table wearing his best suit, the navy blue one Martha had helped him pick out for Sarah's wedding, with Lucy beside him in a yellow dress that Emma had bought for special occasions. Judge Patricia Hammond presided from the bench with the weathered authority of someone who had spent 30 years parsing the difference between legal technicalities and human welfare. She was known throughout the county as fair but thorough, someone who listened to evidence rather than emotion. And Walter took comfort in her reputation even as his stomach churned with anxiety. Across the aisle, Robert Martinez sat with his attorney, a sharp-dressed woman whose expensive briefcase and confident posture suggested she was accustomed to winning. Robert himself had cleaned up well for court, his hair neatly combed, his suit pressed, his demeanor that of a concerned grandfather seeking to protect his orphaned granddaughter from an inappropriate living arrangement. The past 2 weeks since Emma's death had been a whirlwind of legal preparation, interrupted by the basic necessities of caring for a grieving 7-year-old. Walter had moved temporarily into Emma's apartment to maintain Lucy's routines, sleeping on the sofa and learning the intricate choreography of school lunches and bedtime stories and the 100 small decisions that constituted daily life with a child. Lucy had handled her mother's funeral with heartbreaking composure, holding Walter's hand throughout the service and accepting condolences from teachers and neighbors with the grave politeness of someone far older than her years. But Walter had seen the cracks in her brave facade, the nightmares that sent her padding to his makeshift bed in the living room, the way she hoarded her drawings as if afraid they might disappear like everything else precious in her life. "Mr. Martinez," Judge Hammond said, addressing Robert's attorney, "you may present your opening statement." The lawyer rose with theatrical grace, her voice carrying the polished confidence of someone arguing a case she considered already won. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of biological reality versus sentimental attachment. Robert Martinez is Lucy's grandfather, her only living blood relative, and he seeks custody of his deceased daughter's child who has been living with a stranger." Walter's attorney, Janet Walsh, had warned him that Robert's case would focus on the legal primacy of blood relationships, but hearing it articulated so coldly still stung. 6 months of shared meals and bedtime stories reduced to sentimental attachment, as if love could be measured only in genetic percentages. "Furthermore," the lawyer continued, "Mr. Martinez has legitimate concerns about the appropriateness of a single elderly man raising a young girl, particularly given the lack of any legal relationship between them prior to the mother's death." When Walter's turn came, Janet Walsh presented their case with quiet competence, building a methodical argument based on Emma's clear wishes, Walter's consistent presence in Lucy's life, and the expert testimony of teachers and therapists who had observed their relationship over months of careful development. "Your Honor," Janet said, "this case is not about blood relationships or legal technicalities. It's about a child's best interests and the family bonds that have already been established through love, commitment, and daily care." The testimony phase revealed the stark differences between the two men seeking custody. Robert's witnesses spoke about his recent sobriety and financial stability, but they were professional references, employers and counselors who knew him only in controlled settings. When asked about his relationship with Lucy, they could only speak in generalities about his stated intentions. Walter's witnesses painted a different picture entirely. Mrs. Henderson testified about Lucy's obvious attachment to Walter, the way she sought him out during difficult moments at school, the pride she took in calling him Grandpa. The school principal spoke about Walter's reliability and character, his 17 years of faithful service, and his natural way with children. But it was Lucy's child psychologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who provided the most compelling testimony. She had been working with Lucy since Emma's diagnosis, helping her process her mother's illness and the uncertainty about her future. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Chen testified, "Lucy has formed a profound attachment to Mr. Thorne that goes far beyond convenience or circumstance. He represents stability, safety, and unconditional love in her world. Disrupting that relationship would constitute additional trauma at a time when this child has already endured more loss than most adults face in a lifetime." The moment everyone had been dreading arrived when Judge Hammond called for Lucy's private interview. The court-appointed guardian ad litem, a kindly woman named Mrs. Peterson, escorted Lucy to the judge's chambers where they could speak privately about her preferences and feelings. Walter watched Lucy disappear through the heavy oak door, his heart hammering with the knowledge that his entire future, their entire future, might be decided by the words of a 7-year-old trying to navigate adult complexities she shouldn't have to understand. 30 minutes felt like 30 hours before. The door reopened and Lucy emerged, her small hand held securely in Mrs. Peterson's grasp. Her face was tear-streaked but determined, and when she looked at Walter across the courtroom, he saw something that made his breath catch: absolute certainty. Judge Hammond returned to her bench with the grave demeanor of someone about to render a decision that would reshape multiple lives. In her hands, Walter could see official papers that would either validate everything he and Emma had built together or tear it apart with the cold efficiency of legal process. "I have reached a decision," Judge Hammond announced, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "But before I render my ruling, I want both parties to understand that this decision is based entirely on the best interests of the child in question, not on the competing claims of the adults involved." Walter felt Lucy's small hand slip into his, her fingers trembling slightly but her grip steady and sure. Whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else since the day a 6-year-old girl had handed him a birthday invitation and asked him to make her mother smile. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Walter had forgotten how exhausting it could be to care for someone whose needs were both constant and unpredictable, whose emotional states could shift from joy to despair and back again in the space between breakfast and lunch. There had been nights when Lucy woke with nightmares about losing him the way she'd lost her mother, and days when Walter questioned whether a 65-year-old man had any business trying to keep up with a 7-year-old's boundless energy. But there had also been moments of pure magic, like the evening when Lucy had presented him with a handmade Father's Day card 6 months early, explaining that she couldn't wait until the official holiday to tell him he was the best dad a girl could choose. Or the morning when she'd crawled into his bed during a thunderstorm and announced that storms weren't scary when you had a grandpa who knew how to make perfect hot chocolate and tell stories that ended with everyone safe and happy. "Are you ready for school?" Walter asked as Lucy finished her eggs with the methodical determination of someone preparing for battle. "I'm ready for everything," Lucy declared, with the confidence of someone whose world had been shaken but ultimately reinforced by love that proved stronger than legal challenges or biological claims. The drive to Maplewood Elementary took them past familiar landmarks that had gained new significance over the past months. There was Murphy's Diner where Emma had worked, now featuring a small memorial plaque that honored her as a devoted mother and friend to all. There was the park where Walter and Lucy had spent countless afternoons feeding ducks and talking about everything and nothing. The library where they'd discovered Lucy's passion for books about brave princesses and clever animals. The ice cream shop where they'd celebrated the custody victory with sundaes that were mostly whipped cream and sprinkles. At school, Walter walked Lucy to her new classroom, carrying her backpack with the same ceremonial importance that knights once carried shields. In the hallway, they encountered Mrs. Henderson, Lucy's first-grade teacher, who greeted them both with the warm familiarity of someone who had witnessed their relationship develop from its tentative beginnings. "How's our favorite family doing?" Mrs. Henderson asked, and Walter heard in her question the community's acceptance of their unconventional bond. Over the months, he and Lucy had become local celebrities of sorts, the custodian and the little girl who had found each other when they both needed family most. "We're perfect," Lucy answered with absolute certainty, slipping her hand into Walter's with the casual possessiveness of someone claiming her rightful place in the world. The new classroom buzzed with the excitement of fresh beginnings, children reuniting after summer vacation, parents taking first day of school photos, teachers preparing to shepherd another group of young minds through the adventure of learning. Lucy surveyed her new domain with the interest of someone scouting territory, her red shoes tapping against the linoleum floor in a rhythm that suggested barely contained excitement. Mrs. Rodriguez proved to be exactly the kind of teacher Lucy needed. Warm but structured, creative but practical, someone who understood that 7-year-olds learned best when they felt safe enough to take intellectual risks. She greeted Lucy with the special attention reserved for students whose stories had preceded them, and Walter saw Lucy stand a little straighter under her teacher's welcoming smile. "She'll be fine," Mrs. Rodriguez assured Walter, as other parents began their reluctant departures. Lucy has something special, a confidence that comes from being truly loved. That's the best foundation any child can have. Walter kissed Lucy's forehead and whispered their traditional parting words. Have a wonderful day, sweetheart. I'll be here when you need me. Always? Lucy asked the same question she posed every morning, needing the reassurance that had become their daily covenant. Always, Walter confirmed. The same answer he gave every time, meaning it more completely than any promise he'd ever made. As Walter walked back to his truck, he passed the supply closet where he'd worked for 17 years, where Lucy had first approached him with her birthday invitation and changed everything. His replacement, a younger man named David, waved from inside the familiar space that Walter had once thought defined his entire purpose. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years believing his story was winding down, that his most important chapters were behind him, only to discover that love could rewrite the ending at any age. At 65, Walter Thorne was busier, more tired, more worried, and more completely happy than he'd ever been in his life. That evening, after homework was completed and dinner dishes washed, after baths and bedtime stories and the elaborate ritual of tucking in stuffed elephants, Walter sat in his living room looking at the newest addition to their family gallery, a school photo of Lucy in her purple dress and red shoes, grinning with the uninhibited joy of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. The phone rang, and Sarah's voice carried the warmth that had returned to their relationship since Lucy became part of their family. "How was the first day of second grade?" "Perfect," Walter said, watching through the window as evening settled over the town, where he'd found his second chance at fatherhood. "She's already planning tomorrow's outfit." After they hung up, Walter made his final rounds of the house, checking locks, turning off lights, ensuring that his small family was safe and secure for another night. In Lucy's doorway, he paused to watch her sleep, still amazed by the trust that allowed her to rest so peacefully under his protection. On her nightstand sat their newest treasure, a framed photograph of Emma holding newborn Lucy in the hospital, a gift from Carol, who had become a beloved aunt to them both. Beside it lay the letter Emma had written for Lucy's future, waiting patiently for the day when a grown woman would need to hear her mother's voice again. But tonight, all was quiet in the house on Elm Street, where a lonely custodian and an orphaned little girl had built something beautiful from the simple decision to show up for each other when showing up mattered most. Walter turned off the hall light and headed toward his own bedroom, understanding finally that some stories don't end. They just keep getting better, one ordinary day at a time. 6 months later, the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows of Walter's house caught the silver frame of their first official family photograph, taken at the courthouse steps immediately after Judge Hammond's ruling, all three of them grinning with the overwhelming relief of a battle won and a future secured. In the picture, Walter stood with one arm around Lucy and the other holding the custody papers that had made their chosen family legally binding. Lucy wore her yellow dress and the biggest smile Walter had ever seen, while he looked simultaneously exhausted and euphoric, like a man who had just discovered he was allowed to keep everything he'd ever wanted most. The photograph now occupied the place of honor on Walter's kitchen counter, right beside Martha's wedding picture, the two images creating a visual timeline of love, found, lost, and found again in unexpected forms. Lucy had insisted on the placement during their first week living together as an official family, declaring that both my mums should be able to see each other. Walter poured his coffee, still black, some habits never changed, and listened to the sounds of 7-year-old morning preparations echoing from upstairs. Lucy had claimed the guest bedroom as her own, transforming it from Martha's sewing room into an explosion of colorful artwork, stuffed elephants, and books that were gradually taking over every available surface. "Grandpa Walter," Lucy's voice, carried down the stairs with the urgency of someone who had made an important discovery. "I can't find my red shoes. Check under your bed." Walter called back, smiling at the familiar chaos. Some things he had learned were worth adjusting to rather than changing. Lucy's morning shoe hunts had become as much a part of their routine as her evening requests for just one more story at bedtime. The red shoes had been Emma's final gift to her daughter, purchased during one of her last shopping trips before the final hospitalization. Lucy treasured them beyond all reason, insisting they brought good luck and refusing to wear any other footwear for important occasions. Today qualified as important. It was the first day of second grade, and Lucy had been planning her outfit for weeks, with the serious consideration most people reserved for job interviews. Walter had learned to navigate these fashion consultations with the diplomatic skills of a seasoned negotiator, offering gentle guidance while respecting Lucy's fierce independence in matters of personal expression. "Found them!" Lucy announced, triumphantly, her footsteps thundering down the stairs with the enthusiasm of someone who had solved a major crisis. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a purple dress with yellow polka dots, striped tights, and the famous red shoes. Combination that would have horrified fashion experts, but delighted anyone who understood that confidence mattered more than coordination. "Perfect choice," Walter said solemnly, having learned that Lucy's fashion decisions were not suggestions, but declarations of identity that deserved respect and support. Lucy beamed and settled into her usual chair at the kitchen table where Walter had already laid out her breakfast: scrambled eggs with cheese, no salt, and toast cut into triangles, because regular rectangles were too boring for special days. The morning routine had become as comfortable as breathing, each small ritual a building block in the foundation of their shared life. "Do you think Mrs. Rodriguez will like my new backpack?" Lucy asked, referring to her second-grade teacher with the nervous excitement of someone eager to make a good impression. "I think she'll be too busy being impressed by how smart you are to notice your backpack," Walter replied. "But for the record, it's an excellent backpack." The backpack in question was bright pink with a pattern of flying elephants, Lucy's contribution to their back-to-school shopping expedition. Walter had initially suggested something more practical, but Lucy's explanation that elephants never forget, so maybe they'll help me remember my homework, had been too logical to argue with. As they ate breakfast together, Lucy chattering about her hopes for second grade and Walter making appropriately encouraging sounds, he reflected on the changes that 6 months of legal fatherhood had brought to his previously quiet existence. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now resonated with the constant soundtrack of childhood: laughter, questions, the occasional tears that came with scraped knees or hurt feelings, and the blessed chaos that meant someone young and beloved was learning to navigate the world under his protection.